Welcome, everybody, back to another BOLDcast discussion. I'm Carson.
I'm Lindsay.
And this is our discussion for the end of the Chimera Ant arc of Hunter x Hunter. This is part 3 discussion of this arc. We have 2 other podcast-type videos that you can check out if you check out the playlist for this. You can check out the Hunter x Hunter playlist, or you can check out our podcast playlist, which with a bunch of other discussions, and there's a couple live streams in there, a couple videos in there. But we've done a discussion for every arc of Hunter x Hunter up to this point, and you can check out all those. But basically, what we're going to be doing this time is discussing the entirety of the Hunter x Hunter Chimera Ant arc, but in more specifically the latter half of it when the battle starts to the end of the arc. So. Yeah, I got some questions from the community tab, and I wanted to start off, but before we get started in any of those, I wanted to ask you if you had anything you wanted to start off. Should I start that over again? Fuck. I got some questions for the community tab, but yeah, I thought, wait, no, this is way too formal now.
I don't know what you're doing. He has some questions from the community tab. However, before that, I would just like to say...
Don't do that, because then what are you going to say? It's just then you did the same thing. You just went just as formal.
I was turning it into a joke.
But I was going to cut all this out anyway.
Okay.
I don't know what to do. Welcome, everybody, back to another BOLDcast discussion. Just turned into you turning the newscaster. But yeah, we took some questions from you guys, and we got a lot to say. What?
I'm just laughing at you.
Is there anything you want to say before we get into the questions?
No, please proceed to the question. I'm kidding. I feel like. Sorry, this is so funny. This arc, the way that this arc ended really impressed me, honestly. I feel like, especially since I wasn't a huge fan of, like, I guess half of this arc, probably. Not that I hated it, but like in our previous 2 discussions, especially the first one, I know we talked about how I was just kind of like, it's not necessarily my favorite.
It's funny because I rewatched that and I said that, and then you just like, no, I don't dislike it. I like the arc. No, I like the arc. I like it just fine. I'm like, well, yeah, but everything you've said has been you basically saying that you don't like it, and then you're just like, that's not what I was saying. Okay, what are you saying? I'm saying that I basically didn't super enjoy it, but I still liked it. I'm like, okay, that's what I just said. I literally just rewatched that. It happens like near the end, and I'm just like, so you didn't like it? He's like, no, I know I liked it. It's like, okay, well, everything you said has been a criticism.
Well, that's about to change, because I really like this end part. I felt like it was able to like it was able to not only tie up a lot of the problems, or like just make them seem not so bad in hindsight. When I look back at like all the episodes of all those ants, I pretty much forgot all about them, or like they all just kind of blend together. And then it's like the thing that happens with a lot of shows. Naruto, definitely. Clannad, a bunch of stuff where it's like you have a bunch of boring episodes, or like less exciting, or like they're, just kind of repetitive, or something about them that's just not as engaging. And then by the time you get to the end, you have like forgotten that feeling entirely, and you're left with just like only the good parts, only the best parts of it.
Selective memory of like a good finale. Yeah.
Exactly.
You're basically proving that you're a real anime fan then.
Exactly.
That's what all anime fans do.
I know. I still stand by like in those moments. And I guess that's what's good about reactions. It's like a play by play, and like doing these discussions multiple points throughout, because if we had just this finale discussion, we might not have covered some of the points that we had about, that we did in the other 2 discussions. Because at this point now, it's like I'm only really remembering the good things, because it ended so strong. And like I was saying, it not only tied up all the threads and all the loose ends from this arc, it also like incorporated so much of like every previous arc, and like so much foreshadowing and so much character development, and so many things like kind of really came to a head in this arc, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And a lot of the problems, a lot of people. So you said that this part of the arc was really really good and fixed a lot of the pacing problems that you had. But it's not. But it's interesting because I kind of think the same thing. I was kind of bothered at some points, like in the earlier part of this arc in the first half, with pacing problems and et cetera, et cetera. But a lot of people like have the opinion that it carries over into this when the narrator sort of takes hold. They sort of think that like, and this is a question from Henry Nicholas, or at I lost it, at Nikito-san. Henry Nicholas, one of our longtime viewers. This arc is often said that this arc, it's often said that have a time issue. Some points, even Togashi through the narrator recognizes it. The time that Chimera ants arrive and reach such a high power level, the birth of Royal Guard and Meruem, the castle invasion, sometimes seems that the time literally stopped. And there's a few other people who ask the same questions, but a lot of the people are like pointed out, and throughout the arc and just in general in relation to this arc, that like the narrator sort of is used way too much. What did you have a problem with that as far as the pacing goes, or did you think that it was really fucking cool and it was really well used like I do?
I think that the narrator is possibly what really saved specifically this end part of the arc, because I think that
by end part, do you mean the end part of the battle, or the end as in the whole battle?
pretty much the entire battle, because I can imagine, because the narrator isn't taking part in the action necessarily. The narrator is just narrating what is already occurring. So I guess in my opinion, you could have it two ways. You could have, I mean, obviously the whole thing could be different, or you could have the same show, the same shots, the same amount of time spent on each thing, but like one version with the narrator and one version without the narrator. I think it is so much better to have the narrator, because it adds a little bit of entertainment. It adds a little bit of flair. The narrator like brings a certain aspect to it, that like in these moments where, you know, two characters are just standing there and staring at each other, and you're like holding on a frame of them, where normally, you know, if you're in a show like Naruto and you have Naruto running down the path of Orochimaru's lair for like 20 years and then staring up at Sasuke for like 10 seconds straight doing nothing, and it's like that can be quite boring. But then when you have the narrator there and it's consistent, it's not just like, oh, one time we have the narrator and then the rest of the time we don't, or you know what I mean? I felt like it was a distinct choice, and I personally like the choice.
I agree. I really think it's good. I think that it feels like a natural evolution from the York New arc, because in the York New arc especially, there's like there's a importance placed on like fractions of a second. Like when Kurapika and Killua and Gon are like trying to get information on the Phantom Troop, trying to capture one of them, they do that thing in the hotel where like the lights go out and they have like literally like I think at one point in the car, Kurapika's asking like, if you can get me a second. No, even half a second will do. And he's not saying in like, oh, I just need a little bit of time, and this is, you know, a way of me saying that I need just a little bit of time. He's saying, if you literally give me a half a second, like, you know, they're as they mature as combatants, they require everything gets quicker and time slows. And then the fact that that's introduced earlier on in the story and evolves, and then at this point, when the strongest people that we've seen up to this point are literally causing like nuclear level destruction in or battles that would take like 20 episodes over, you know, in order to complete, happen in like in what is sort of expanded, but is really just them moving really fast over the course of maybe a minute max. Like for all the big explosive parts at the start of the battle and in the fight with Meruem and Netero. I love that, and that wouldn't, all those things wouldn't be possible. That evolution of sort of the lengthening of time and all that, it wouldn't be possible without the narrator. And it also makes sense if you think of the interpretation of Nen, because Nen, people who master their Nen live longer, so they have in a way, like, the stronger you get, the more mastery over time that you have, in a way. Like, Netero's over 100 years old and is still not a little past his prime, but still super powerful. And obviously in the fight with Meruem, he's just moving at lightning speeds, and he's mastered, his attacks are at a lightning speed. And there's not like, in a manga, it's really hard to illustrate that because it's just pages, but in an anime, it's also really hard. And the way that they did it, the way that they illustrated all of that with the narrator treating it, essentially, it went from a manga adaptation to like a manuscript adaptation. It felt like it, like, especially when I noticed specifically in the scene where Pito is first notices them flying above on the dragon, and they're diving down, and Pito's like, the way that the narrator and the way it's written, it reads like a book. And I think a lot of people don't like that because anime fans are illiterate and they're stupid. No, I'm just kidding. But honestly, I think I'm saying that as an extreme way of saying.
But honestly, I think they're illiterate and stupid.
Well, I'm not a big book reader myself either, so I can't really talk like that. But I think a big part of it is that, like, a lot of people are probably like me, and that's because I really liked it, but I imagine a lot of the people who get really into anime, speaking of as somebody who's really into anime, I don't read a lot of books. I'm sure a lot of the people who didn't like it probably also don't read a lot of books. I just happen to like it just because it's my taste. But that's just an inference that I've made. But, like, the scene with Pito in and they're coming, the way that the narrator's like, Pito's eyes looked up, and the reason was just because. And then it's like a line from Pito, as if it kind of this is kind of a weird thing, but it reads like it plays out how the narrator talks in, like, the Grinch, if you've ever seen the old cartoon movie of the Grinch, when the Grinch is breaking into the house, and then Cindy Lou Who, like, wakes up, and he grabbed her a drink and tucked her off to bed. Good night, he said, or whatever. Like the way it cuts in like that. It's just like it reads like a book.
Says something and then the thing happens.
Yeah, and like the dialogue, it's the dialogue shows up, and when characters talk, when the narrator is sort of leading the scene, when it's from the narrator's perspective, it's like an omniscient point of view. It's literally like the whole thing. The perspective shift is what I'm getting at. Is much more like literary and not like a manga, literature. Like it's just very different. It's very odd. I can see why people don't like it if they're a lot more into not just anime but the rest of the show, because obviously the way that it's all portrayed, it's not like the narrator didn't exist before, but it's used obviously more frequently. Mm-hmm. and the use of it is not just a show don't tell thing. I think it's beyond that type of conversation. I think that it's solving a problem to do with the action and the power scaling, and I think it's really cool.
Yeah, anyway. And it as well, yeah, like you were saying, with the speed that things are happening, it's almost impossible without just literally telling you constantly what 5 seconds have passed. This many seconds, and in the, like, without them telling you, then you would have absolutely no idea. If the narrator didn't come on at the end of every episode and be like, and only 10 seconds had passed since the entire thing started, then you'd be like, I just watched 20 minutes of an anime. This is a 20-minute long event, you know?
It's kind of like the opposite of what we complain a lot about. We use ReZero as an example of this a lot, of like poor dialogue direction and a lack of visual metaphor, visual action during long drawn out exposition and dialogue scenes. But I think this is the opposite of that. It's like everything, the action is so dense and layered from, a literal perspective of like the things that people are choosing to do in their internal decision making, and the momentum of that, the time's moving so slowly that like the momentum of somebody running is like a factor in their decision making. Like when Knuckles like running down towards Yuppie and he's like, oh shit, I've been duped, but I'm already running. I can't turn around in time. I got to commit to the attack. And all of this stuff comes in, and it's like it's because the narrator has to come in moments like that. It lends a lot of, in a way, physicality to like what's going on. The fact that everything's moving so fast that like decision making is faster than, you know, the realization of things is the time between the realization and the decision and the action of that realization being made is like a huge valley, and that filling that with the voice describing everything in multiple ways and everything. I think it's necessary, and I think that it wouldn't have worked in a worse written show. Like it is the kind of thing that doesn't work in if it wasn't as well considered or as well done. It's just a testament to how well the show's written, that you need that in order for the action to work like this, and it still works.
Yeah, I think that as well. I think that I think that the narrator is not 100% necessary, so I do think I know where people are coming from. However, it was like a stylistic choice essentially, and I do like the choice, and I like as well that it kind of eliminated a lot of the very typical anime, like some guy standing there and like Netero could have stood there and explained his entire backstory. You know what I mean? Like he could have told it from his perspective of like, oh yes, I went up. You have something of like, oh yes, I went up on this mountain and I did this, and I'm gonna tell you my life story.
Are you saying that you wish that happened instead?
No, I'm saying I'm glad that didn't happen,
Yeah,
and I'm glad.
I agree.
You know, in the moment where Knuckle is like flying through the air, and the narrator's like, and then he was feeling so great.
Well, in that case, it was Knuckle who was describing all of that. So I was.
Oh, okay.
I'm conflating inner monologue with the narrator, but it's the same
I couldn't
kind of
remember in that.
In that case, it was Knuckle going on this long. And that was the thing. It was a long drawn. And at some point, he realizes he's monologuing, and he's like, "Wait, why is time moving so slow right now? Am I about to die?" Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Okay. I misremembered because it has been a while at this point. But yeah, I do like that it kind of eliminates some of that like really excessive anime where the character just like goes on and on about the same thing all the time. You know, I feel like someone's still saying these things that the author wants to be included and wants the audience to know. But we don't need Pito to say, I'm going to look up for no reason. But the author still wants people to know that it was like just by chance or whatever. You know what I mean? I don't know.
You don't know?
I don't know.
Well, all right, me either. How do you feel about the This is from Baseball Tomorrow, classic viewer. How do you feel about the exploration of Gon's character in Chimera Ant? Hints of it was teased early on as the Hunter exam arc. Do you think Togashi always planned for this, or was it an idea that developed through this story?
I'm not sure if like this exact situation was always planned, but I think that it's fairly obvious that like something of this nature was planned from the beginning. Honestly, this happened a lot sooner in the story than I was kind of expecting, because I know that this still goes on, and obviously the manga isn't finished. I'm not sure how much it extends like past where the anime got to, but I know that it's not like a ton, but it's also hasn't ended yet. And like I had anticipated like this was coming, but I didn't know if we were gonna even get it. You know, like I'm like, okay, there's gonna be some kind of falling out between Gon and Killua. Gon's gonna do something so stupid and reckless, but I don't know if I'll even get to see it, because I don't know if it'll have gotten to that point, or if it'll be like, you know, the end, like in the final arc of Hunter x Hunter, this happens. But it's kind of interesting, and also just fits with Hunter x Hunter as a whole, that it's not saved for the end. You know what I mean? That like this isn't the very last thing that ever happens in the story, and that like it continues on after. I do kind of like that as well.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's like a better version of Berserk in that way. Like Berserk 97 ends with a similar sort of like big moment like that. I wouldn't want to get into specifics, but like the problem with 97 is that it it just ended on that moment, and then it was just that moment, and there was no resolution, there was no like questioning of it, there was no reflection, there was no epilogue, and you were just kind of left like, what the fuck? And even the movie wasn't much better. It was slightly better. You got like 2 scenes after, but still wasn't quite enough. It was always an advertisement for the manga, whereas in this we get a whole other arc, and I think the series finishes off at a really good part, to where I won't give any spoilers, but I feel like it finishes off in a way that is satisfying enough to me, where I still haven't gone off to read the manga, because the next arc I don't think is complete, and I'm not interested in being left hanging in that way when I got like kind of a satisfying conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the thing about the Gon stuff is, I've gotten some shit in the comments for this arc specifically, of when I would talk to you and humor you and give input about like Gon's craziness, and we could talk about whether it's psychopathic or whether it's just childish. That's a different conversation, but the whole idea of him having a temper and emotion and being emotionally unstable underneath the layer of like, hopeful protagonist, that whole thing was picked up on by you, I think, by episode 7. This is something that you always knew about, that you were always aware of, and yeah, I don't know. Like, 1, I don't like that I got shit for talking to you about it from people in the comments. 2, I think that you realizing that it is what made this whole reaction series so far up to this point, what will make this, I think, really worth watching to a lot of people, because a lot of people, including myself, and I talked about this at some point in the reaction discussions, it's uncommon to really see that coming and to really put all those pieces together like that. You really and before, like, for a long time when you would talk about it, I was like, I would not sort of feed into it. I would do the thing like, oh, so what do you think? And then you're like, oh, well, then you think that, yeah, maybe he'll do this, maybe he'll do that, maybe he'll freak out and like blow up the people close to him, or like he'll, like disregard the feelings of others or something like that. You just like hit the nail on the head in like 70% or more every time. And eventually I had to start like, there were enough clues towards that it was undeniable, and I couldn't really say anything about it, but I wasn't just going to deny that this was happening, because you were picking up on something that the author was clearly putting out there from the beginning. And that's to talk about Baseball Tomorrow's question. Yeah, I do think it was from the beginning. I think that this aspect of it is a deconstruction of the shonen protagonist, and that's what Gon's story up to this point has been about in a lot of ways, is this rejection of social norms. And that's what sort of Hunter x Hunter is about in the beginning, in its entirety. It's, he doesn't want to be the best hunter. He just wants to be free. He wants to experience life. That's really what he wants. He wants to find his dad, but he wants to he represents the part of the kid that doesn't want to like succeed and rise to the top and be like the best in his town. He represents the kid who disregards all of that and wants to live his own life. So it's not like a Naruto figure. It's the opposite of a Naruto figure. And just like how you said, his journey isn't about, unlike Naruto, representing like sort of a classic shonen protagonist. Naruto has the fox. He has this anger within him. He has this lack of emotional control, and his realization as a person, as he tries to become Hokage, is this sort of befriending this thing within him and bringing it under his control and using it for good, and as an allegory for him becoming emotionally mature. Gon is the opposite. And it's very interesting to me that you were able to pick up on that early on in a way that wasn't just, oh my God, this kid's so weird for acting this way. I think a lot of people kind of run into that at some points throughout the show. But the fact that you were able to put all those together without my influence at all is really cool. And I think that brings a lot to your reaction. So good job.
Thank you. I know I am an absolute genius. I think that it's really interesting and really great, because I think I think like it's undeniable from the start, especially I imagine for you, especially on the rewatch, just like noticing all of these things that are so obvious that, you know, Gon at the beginning is able to seem so free and so lively and just so unbothered by anything, because that's just kind of the world that he's in. He lived on like a fantastic little island where like there was only good things happening, essentially, for the most part. Like, he lived with his aunt and everything was a great adventure, and he went off into the woods every day and this and that. And it kind of is actually similar to what we were talking about before, of like he's just living his life, and like, you know, that's his life, and then no one really knows about hunters. He knows about his dad, who's a hunter, and like that's the thing. And then he like goes, and then after you get past the hunter exam is so mysterious, it's so hard to get through. And then when you get there, then everyone's a hunter. Everyone that we meet after that is basically a hunter, or like knows about hunters, you know. And then no one knows about Nen, and it's so mysterious. And then after that point, then everyone knows about Nen, and it's like you're just like progressing through life, and it's like growing up. And you know how it's like when you're
a kid, you're a big fish in a small pond, and then you move out to the city, and then now you're
even,
surrounded by people
just,
around
just
your level.
Aging in general, of like, you know, you're a kid, you only know about a certain things, and you're like, and then and every new bit of information you get is like, oh, this is so interesting, this is so cool, I'm gonna go to school. Okay, now I'm like through high school or whatever. I finished. I'm a hunter now, or like I'm an adult now. And then you're like, okay, and then you're like actually an adult, and then you're like, okay, now I'm like actually know like a bunch of the bad shit that's going on in the world, and it's kind of whatever. But the interesting thing about him is that he didn't like really learn any lessons from those experiences along the way so much. He didn't mature along with the world. Like, as he like moved to each new stage, he didn't like gain new clarity and like learn new lessons of like, oh, I'm gonna learn to you know, be more like this, or I'm gonna learn to not get angry, or I'm gonna learn to do this or do that. He just kind of stayed the same until it got to a point that he couldn't, that he was so overwhelmed with everything. He didn't like take time to slowly adjust. He kind of just like let everything fly past him. And then when he like came across something that he couldn't let go, it completely destroyed him, because he didn't really have practice of, you know, dealing with things in a healthy way at all.
Yeah, exactly.
And I feel like I had something else to say about that, but I got distracted because
by yourself.
By myself. I kept talking. I was like, oh, I like thought of something, and then I'm like, oh, I'll finish this, and then I'll loop back around to whatever I was gonna say. What was I gonna say? It was something like, oh, I remember. So this is really interesting as well. When we're watching the Hunter exam arc, and I remember at the beginning when you're watching it and Gon's just all happy and this and that, and then you see Hisoka and you're like, how they can't let this guy be a hunter. Like they can't let this horrible, like creepy, murderous dude like get all the like this is not that good of a person. And then it like comes along and you're like, oh, I guess everyone's not that good of a person, but like Gon and his friends still seem like pretty good people, or like Gon is just so like pure and so good, and then it's like he's not really that much different than like all of these other people, you know. It's like and it's different in to Killua, because Killua had like a really rough past where he was like, you know, a literal assassin and was like killing people for money and for his job, and Gon was just, you know, hanging out with animals and playing around in the forest basically. I don't really know where I'm going with that. I don't know. Anyway, never mind. We can move on to something.
Did you have a point?
I guess my point was that I'm just thinking back to when I first started watching this show and thinking that like Gon was so different than some of these other people, and like that
the show is the point. You're saying that the point of the show up to this point, and the point of this arc in that moment when he's fighting Pito, is the full understanding that he isn't really different. Yeah, and I think that again, like all of his interactions with Hisoka are about that, I think, and that's what Hisoka is about in relation to Gon. He's the self. That's what Hisoka is. That's what a lot of the Joker character is. They're the jester. They're the person who tells the truth, but they're the only person they're the clown. They're the only person who's allowed to tell the truth, and they're kind of disconnected from it. And the only person in the royal court who's allowed to tell the truth. That's what a jester is in medieval times. It's like they make fun of the king. They can make fun of whoever they want. And they won't get killed for it because that's their job, is to make sure that that there's this constant presence of understanding of the way things really are, and that's what the jester archetype is normally supposed to be, and that's what Hisoka is in relation to Gon. And there isn't like as much of a kingly sort of hierarchy, but Hisoka and all of the hunters who are like evil represent sort of the admittance that freedom comes at a cost, and that for better or for worse, freedom's important. And if you're going to want to have the freedom to not be a part of society and to chart your own path and to have this structure that lets people freely, if they're qualified and if they prove themselves, in like a Ayn Randian sense of like Incredibles, where there's the people who are special and everybody else should just get out of their way. And this is a thing that the Hunter Association is a place for people like that to flourish, for better or for worse. And that's the risk that society has been that the Hunter Association and everybody around it has chosen, is they've chosen that for everyone that's like Jing, who is like, out there doing archaeology work, and, maybe Jing's not the best guy. He's clearly not a great dad, but there's also going to be people like Hisoka, and the fact that Hisoka exists and that he's so interested in Gon, he's sort of a mirror to Gon in that way. And he's introduced so early on, and he comes back every so often to sort of reinforce this idea that, you can't, if you're going to accept these terms, then this is the type of person you're going to deal with. And it's not, looks can be deceiving because, like you said, eventually you realize that Gon isn't much different. In fact, as he's meeting Hisoka and during the Hunter exam, he's always excited. He's never really, and he kind of is scared, but scared in the way that like is exciting. He constantly is trying to put himself in harm's way to get on Hisoka's level or to prove himself and to, just more and more proving how alike they are. And then once we get to this point, we see that like this whole idea of morality is flimsy. It's flexible because the base morality, the first level is freedom and doing what you want and being yourself and being true to yourself for better or for worse. And that's what Gon and Hisoka kind of represent to me.
Mm-hmm. And I think that it's interesting because I just thought of something interesting to talk about how, with hunters and with this and with that, and like there's no like psychological like checking process of like, is this person stable, is this gonna be okay, are they gonna be a threat to society? And it's really interesting to think about, with Gon, how he just seems so great and then completely loses it, and then it's like, oh well, he's really young and he like maybe like he shouldn't have this kind of, and like just with Nen in general, it's like he shouldn't have this kind of power because he's so young and so immature and he like doesn't know how to do anything and this and that. And then it's really interesting when we see with the fight with Netero and how that kind of like Netero we've talked about before, and how him in the fight, how he went from kind of just like, oh, I need to do this fight because it's my job, to then really like getting into the fight and enjoying the fight. And then you're like, okay, so this literal child shouldn't be allowed to have these superpowers because it's dangerous, because he has the emotional range of a child. He shouldn't be allowed to see that. And then you see someone who was like a leader in this super powerful society, who is like, supposedly very responsible and in charge of a lot of things, and he also was capable of kind of losing it, obviously in a different way than Gon, but it kind of goes to the point almost. It's like, well, no one should really have that kind of power, because the cost of having these superhuman abilities makes you kind of less human. Like, your actions are so far beyond.
What do you mean? I don't understand what you mean.
I guess I'm saying of like.
Are you saying that nobody should have Nen? I don't understand what you mean.
I guess I'm thinking about like in relation to kind of like the real world, where it's like, oh, you shouldn't give a child a gun or whatever, because they or like if you gave like a child a nuke and then they have the power to press that and like blow someone up, and it's like, well, that's not very good because they have the emotional range of a child, and that's really dangerous. But then it's like, if you gave that same thing to just an adult, then like having that kind of ability can also.
Are you saying there's not much difference between Gon and Netero?
I'm saying that there's a difference, but they both are operating on a different level than normal people, and that
I don't think they are.
No,
I don't. I think that I don't think they are operating on a different level at all. I think that the whole point is that they are normal people. They're just not. They don't act like a fucking slice of life character. They don't act exactly like. They don't talk like we talk. But the whole point of their character is that they represent something deep within us. The Netero, I think that they each represent a different facet. They aren't trying to. I don't think Togashi or the story at large is trying to say something about. Necessarily people having, whether great power comes great responsibility. I think that I think it's actually saying the opposite, that like, there's room for not having responsibility with great power, and but also exploring the idea, like I said, that like, if you're going to allow people who have power or who don't, or if you're going to, it's sort of it's a meditation on like the desire for freedom, and in turn the understanding that that with the abandonment of responsibility, you also abandon the safety of society. And if you're going to enter this world or accept these terms, then you have to be the kind of person that can deal with the consequences. I think that's a big part of it. And I think that that's what Netero exemplifies. And I think that, like you mentioned, the connection between Netero and Gon, I think that that's a very strong connection, because Netero sees something in Gon from a very early point in the story, and kind of takes a liking to him and sees in him this quality. And as we see, like, they both have very similar endings, like you said, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say before. And I guess what I was trying to say was like they have abilities that are superhuman, but at the end of the day, they are both still human. And like that's where like the danger or like the risk comes in, is because there's always going to have their own desires and their own fears and their own like personal things that affect them. And they're not just like robots who will make the correct decision or for the right reasons all of the time. And I think that that's interesting, because yeah, they both lose their arms and then use their nen. And it's like I think we talked about in the episode of when Gon winds up for his final big blast without his arm, and he just has like the flying around in the air, and it's like the same as what Netero just did. And it's so, and I guess that what I'm trying to compare is like there's the like super old man and then the very young child, and they're both kind of doing the same thing, because they both have been given the opportunity to like use their ability in the way that they want, I guess.
Well, so as far as like the morality or like the great power comes with great responsibility, that's something where I think it comes into play is the comparison with Netero and Gon in those final moments, especially because as we see with Gon throughout the whole arc, he has a vendetta, and that's the reason he's doing this. He's not doing it to save people. He's not doing it because it's, Kite had a responsibility to like be a conservationist and deal with this hazard of this invasive species threatening people and nature. He's not doing it for that. He's doing it for revenge of Kite, and he's doing it for a very personal reason. And that individualism is a big part of Hunter x Hunter, and that is mirrored in Netero, the way that Netero chooses to, or the Netero's motivation. Because we see with the Hunter, or with the UN, or whoever those suits were, who called Netero and said, you guys got to take care of this. These guys, these like government officials were like all the surrounding countries and stuff like that. They were like, this is a big problem. We need to deal with it. But we don't want to take the blame if shit goes bad. So what we're going to do is we're going to hire a contractor, and that's going to be you. And since we give you all this money, and since we give you all this access for all your hunters, you got to take care of this. So it's a political thing. It's not even about saving the world. And that's the interesting thing is like when again, like so much of Hunter x Hunter is like a acceptance and meditation, like I said, on individualism and versus collectivism, because it's a Japanese story, and so much of Japanese culture is about responsibility. It's about like living for the whole and everything. So then when you zoom out, there's sort of this cynicism that's always present when you deal with these countrywide or association-wide problems with Hunter x Hunter. There's always this like, they're the outside, they tell everybody that they're doing it for the greater good, or they're telling everybody that they do it for all these reasons, but really they have a personal reason. They want to advance, or they want to not be blamed if it fails. They want to, but still look good if it succeeds because they gave it off to the right people and they delegated, and then they'll get their next election. That's kind of like the whole story with that. And NGL, it's like, oh, we're all about nature, and we all want to preserve nature. Really, the country is just a front for a crazy drug ring, and it's not good at all. Oh, the Zoldycks, they're like they're assassins, but they're very proud. They take pride in their work. Oh, they're really abusive, and they fucked up Killua as a kid. They're not like this, big structure with all these butlers and this whole village and this whole structure supporting them in this sort of prideful way. It's actually kind of gross because it's the underbelly is Killua getting whipped by his parents in a fucking dungeon. And so like all of this stuff, whenever you zoom out, it always just seems to get worse. It just seems to get like as far as people, it always feels like people are like poisoning the purity and all this politics is always poisoning this pure nature that everything has. And I think that's partly what the show is getting to when it shows Netero and when it shows Gon. It's like all of these things. It's showing that like Netero, whereas Gon is here for a personal reason, Netero isn't even here to appease the suits or for the Hunter Association. Really, he got here because he has been looking for this challenge for the last like 100 years, literally. Since he started training, and he hit his peak, and he plateaued, and then he reached a new high, and then has been calcifying and rotting from the outside in since then, and losing that spark and growing weaker. It disgusts him, and you can see that in the Hunter exam as well. He ranks people. I don't know if you remember. In the last fight of the Hunter exam, he ranks people completely arbitrarily, and like the people who. There was an uneven number of people, and he does like a reverse bracket or some weird shit where you just need to win 2 fights and then you succeed. If he sees you as having a lot of potential, they actually had to have less fights. And Leorio, who he saw as really weak and didn't like him, had to fight the most throughout the whole thing. We didn't see it because Gon got knocked out. But with Netero, there's always this persistent like focus on himself. And that's, I think, what it's about. That's what Netero is about. It's like, but it's also weird because then he turns it on its head at the end, where he's like, oh, you were an ant. That's that pride where he's just like, you're a bug, you're an ant, you're stupid, you don't know about humanity. So then it does kind of zoom out, and there is this sort of collective pride of, but I don't know if it's just in his last moments he's back falling on that, despite the fact that he not rejected society, but puts a lot more faith in himself and a lot more care in his own goals. But in that last moment, he's like, I'll show you human ingenuity, and then he hits the nuke, right? So I don't know. It's conflicting, and it's definitely deep and layered, but I think that generally it's the whole idea is this there's an ugly side to freedom too. It's been all about, the whole show's been about, you can do anything you want if you have the desire to, if you have a dream, you go towards it. Don't let yourself, let it fall by the wayside. Don't get hung up on a bunch of bullshit. Live the life that you want to live on your terms, but accept that there's another side to it. And Gon wasn't prepared for that, clearly, but Netero was, clearly. I think maybe that's the difference.
Yeah, and it's, the age thing comes into a factor too, because yeah, you're right. Gon is still, or was still, working towards getting stronger, and like he had a lot of potential, whereas Netero had already used his potential, so that's the thing. It's like Netero in that fight was able to like kind of go out on his own terms, essentially, of either he's gonna defeat like the strongest being in existence, or he's gonna die, and he has his backup plan of the bomb, which is good, which, like you said, it's like the whole like human resilience or ingenuity or whatever. But yeah, and that's the thing with Netero going into that fight, he knows that he's probably like, there comes a point in the fight where he knows that he's gonna die, but he's happy or satisfied in a way to be going out in a fight and like fighting a strong opponent and really giving it his all. Yeah. Whereas Gon, he isn't, in his fight, he's not thinking, oh, I'm gonna sacrifice my life in this fight. I'm going to sacrifice all of my potential, all of my future.
Well, he was.
Well, he
did. That's why it happened, is because he made that decision internally to do it.
I guess the thing is that he made the decision, but it's I guess what I'm trying to say is like he as a child was not really capable of like knowing the actual consequences.
Yeah, the consequences.
He made that decision, but it's like if your brain doesn't develop till you're 25 or whatever. Him at 12 years old or 13 or however old he is like, he's making a life or death decision, or he's making a huge something that will ruin the entire future of his life, but he's not thinking about it because he's so zoned into like what's in front of him right now. Whereas it's kind of the opposite with Netero. Is Netero like knows what's ahead of him, and he knows that it's not going to be good, and he's just going to keep getting older. So it's like a worthy thing to do, and like kind of a good thing to do, because it's only worse from here. Whereas Gon could have had it so much better from here on out, but he didn't care.
I see Netero's choice to use the bomb differently than that. After thinking about it for a second, I think that it all comes down to the ego and pride that he has. I think that his decision to use the bomb wasn't like, okay, I'll do this because it's all I can do. I think that him falling back on humanity's evolution, et cetera, it proves it's sort of Netero becomes because we're dealing with like the ants versus the humans, he becomes like the human element. He becomes the human spirit. And this desire, this ego, this individual, again, like the idea with the ants as they evolve is because they have the human DNA in them. They need names. They have like an ego. They have aspirations, and that breaks down. It's said in the show that it breaks down their structure and the efficiency of their units, but it also allows them to use better tactics, and it's a trade-off. But they're trading away the thing that like kept them together, and like this introducing the individual element into this structured, regimented society. Everybody has a job, everybody knows their place, everybody works. They're fulfilled in that on a basic animalistic level because they are made for that. Whereas humanity, we have this innate thing in us that makes us want to reject that idea of, get a job, work your job, have kids, live in this box and do what you got to do because you're a part of this greater whole. We don't think like that naturally. There's a lot in our society that makes us bend to that will. For the ants, they were lucky because it was natural and they could do that without sacrificing their humanity because they didn't have it. The humanity element is eventually kind of their downfall because it keeps them from becoming like the true, ant rulers, whatever, because now they're more human, and that's their biggest problem. So I think that's what Netero is embodying in that fight, especially in the end, where it's the human ego, it's that human like spite and that shitty little like, fuck you, I'm dying, but I'm gonna take you out with me, you piece of shit. Animals, they don't really do that, like, unless they're trying to protect somebody else naturally. But Netero wasn't trying to protect, like, I don't think he was he was. That's why he has the bomb, is to do that. But like, if we listen to him talk, and especially at the beginning of the fight when he's arguing with Meruem, and he's like, "Oh, I'll give you your name if you fight me," and he's like trying to like, "I'm not here to talk. I don't want to talk to you." There was a possibility to resolve this with speech. He'd been alive for like a month and he'd already learned so much, and Netero could see how much he'd learned. But he came there to fight. He came there to prove himself to himself, to show his worth and show that what he's done with his life mattered and that he's truly powerful. And if he can't do that through his own training, he'll at least show him how measly and pitiful he really is by blowing him up. That's why he turns so like grotesque in his final seconds when he detonates the bomb. Is he like that curse comes out of him, this like ugly shit, very similar to Gon. So I don't see it as like, oh, he sacrificed himself for the greater good. He sacrificed himself to spite Meruem and to show him that he was better, because that's what he really cared about. That's how I see it anyway.
I didn't really think I was saying he necessarily sacrificed himself for the greater good. I meant like him dying in the fight is like his, I guess what I was saying, like similar to Gon, is like he was throwing away his future because that's what he like wanted to do. He didn't want to necessarily live past this fight because he would never get that again, and then he would just wither away and get super old. Yeah. So it does come down to the whole like, it's a sacrifice for the good of humanity, but it's also selfish because he wanted the outcome. Like he kind of wanted to die in that fight, or like he wanted to really be in that fight and give him the last like. And then he knew, in that moment when he is about to die, he knows that he's gonna have the last laugh. Basically, even if he's already dead, he knows that he still won in the end. And that's the thing as well, that like you're talking about the humanity, and it's like, yes, the bugs wouldn't have like a like if Meruem was dying and he like did something that would kill Netero, it's not necessarily like this whole like, oh well, I still won because you died too. It's like,
I think it is.
I guess
that's what I'm saying is what it is. That's my point. That's how I see it. Is that's what he was doing? Is he was saying like,
no, I'm saying that like a lot of, like you were talking about the difference between humans and ants, and like a lot of the other ants, especially like like gaining human emotions, would have never had the feeling that Netero had in his last moments of like the spiteful, petty, like I'm gonna take you down with me, and I'm gonna die first, but I know that you're fucked too, kind of. You know what I mean?
No, what do you mean in relation? Like, what are you saying about that?
I'm trying to say like the Netero was sacrificing himself and protecting humanity, but what he was focused on was like the way that he felt victorious
Yeah.
for himself. And what I'm saying, I'm comparing that back again to how you were talking about like the whole thing with the ants and how they just had, especially at the beginning, they just had their job to do, and they
You're saying that they have that in them now, or they didn't have them before?
I'm saying
or
that
what?
they didn't have it in before.
Yeah.
And it would like that is like the human aspect of like the selfishness or individuality kind of
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, and it shows obviously like the literal thing is it shows it's illustrated with Meruem because he is sort of representing this like new thing, even though he is becoming more human. He's operating as an ant in that moment, and I think that him not even conceiving that he could have a trump card like that is part of the whole individualistic versus collectivist commentary of the show. Personally, I think that him like being, and he lived in the end because like the collective is obviously stronger than one guy, but like I think that that's sort of what it's saying is this sort of this rebellious sort of and spiteful feeling. But what I find really interesting about it is, so I've talked a lot about how this whole individualism thing and this freedom aspect and this sovereignty of the individual and how it's reflected in a lot of the show. But this is a case in these two moments where, like, again, Netero does this as like it seems like he's doing it as this collective thing and like saving humanity and whatever and sacrificing himself for the greater good, but he's not doing it for that. It's ugly. It's disturbing. It's not nice. It's not prideful. It's not this like shining, smiling at his younglings or whatever as he like Obi-Wan getting stabbed by Darth Vader or whatever. And with Gon, him sacrificing himself to take down Pito, it's like it's not good. And so I think that's the really interesting thing about the series going forward, possibly, is this like the whole show's been from this perspective of seeing both in a way, seeing how freedom is good and individualism is good, but also this underbelly of how kind of sick it is and how lonely it is and how maybe it's not good, or maybe it's there's something to there's or at least that like at least there it's not all great. There's a bad side to it too with Hisoka, like we talked about before. But the fact that both these times, these like pillars of individualism and individual pride, and fighting for your and hunting for your dream and fighting for yourself and what you believe in, that their final moments in these explosive, big climactic moments, it's like a horror movie. It's like Gon turns into a monster and Netero turns into a monster, and they both sacrifice themselves for their own grudges. And it's not so that individualism, and then we see things from Kilo's perspective, who is trying to pass on this light and like be not antisocial and be social and help and pay it forward and help all these people, help Palm and help Ikalgo and do all these things and be what he thought Gon was being for him. So then there's this sort of like reciprocity forms from that's based on actually helping other people and not just acting for your own self-interest. And we see that in Killua before that, and then we see him as he's like reaching out for Gon, telling him to stop. Like, it's just interesting how everything up to this point has been about individualism, and then as we follow Killua, as we get to these final moments, it's not good. It's not, the show isn't presenting that like a positive thing, and I think that's interesting. It's in conflict with the rest of the shit.
I hear you purring. He's drooling.
He loves it.
Are you drooling? I'm having a great time. I'm having a great time sitting with me.
Intermission over. Question from Irem Kose. Thoughts on Meruem versus Netero? They also ask about Clash of Ideals, about the reason Netero is fighting, etc., etc. We already talked about that. What do you think about Meruem versus Netero?
I think that it's a really interesting fight because it really, like we talked about how Netero kind of parallels and like mirrors Gon in a lot of ways during their fights and stuff. But it's interesting with this fight how, you know, we talk about humanity versus or like individualism versus collectivism, or you know, like the ants versus the people kind of thing. But I think we also talked about during these episodes how it kind of turns into like who's really more human and who's like more evil, or like who's actually the monster in this situation. You know, with Meruem being like, "Oh, let's just talk things out," and Netero being like, "No, I will kick your ass. Come on, let's fight. I'm gonna hold this the only information you want hostage, so that you will physically get into an altercation with me." And like, yeah, how you're talking about with Netero in the end, how like he looks like disgusting and like deformed and like drained and like not even like a person at that point, you know. And so I think it's really interesting, and like so much was going right with that fight, like everything, like the animation we talked about a lot during that episode where Meruem goes flying through the air and like has a certain weight and a certain like feeling to it that makes you feel like that's really him being tossed around like that. And there's just a lot of really, really good things. I think the whole like how they kind of switch it up, like how Netero like turns into a monster as well, and then but as Meruem was kind of turning into a human, and then they kind of end up at the same place again. And it's kind of like that with a lot of Hunter x Hunter as well, where it's like that's kind of the whole point, is like there's like kind of good people and bad people, but at the end of the day they're all just people. Even if this guy's an ant, he's kind of just a guy at this point, and he's has a lot of really messed up thoughts and ideas about the way that things should be. But he wasn't even really given that much of a chance, or you know, after a month he had already grown more.
He'd come so far in such little time.
More in 1 month than Gon grew in like this entire experience. Basically, he like learned things, redeveloped his opinions, learned more things, redeveloped them again. He was constantly like going over. Sometimes he would go back and then he'd be like, no, and like, you know, move forward or like move on to something else. It was just, you know, and even in the fight when he's like, oh yeah, people can have like their own zone or whatever of like people that I think are good can survive. And it's like, well, that's not really great. However, you know, if you gave him a bit more time or like maybe talked with him more, then he might have had a different opinion that was in line with like what people really wanted. So it's just, and then it's just kind of sad because then in the end, after he gets amnesia and everything, it's like that is like, all he kind of wanted was to be happy, which is, you know, kind of the you know, speaking to another part of like human desires of like, you know, with Gon and with Netero, how like they had like desires that were involved like fighting and like or revenge or like proving yourself or whatever. And Meruem had all of these things. He wanted to be the best. He wanted to be the king, blah, 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 blah. But in the end, he just wanted to play a board game.
Again, it comes back to that like collectivism versus individualism sort of theme. It's like Netero or Meruem was very much like the king of the ants at the beginning. He embodied what the ants purpose, the ants' desire as a collective to like dominate and grow. And his presence sort of, when he first showed up, like initially, like his fearful presence, like when he was initially born, like kind of recentered everyone onto him. Like there was all this turmoil, and you can see that when the royal guards were born too. They, you know, there was so much like insubordination and like people going off doing their own thing. There was Ramit, his whole arc of like being punished by Colt for eating humans and not handing them in, et cetera, et cetera. And whenever there was like one of these new things born, and then the king, it would always like recenter to this. And then, as it goes along, obviously he learns to become more of a human. He leans more into that like humanity aspect. And maybe it's because here's the thing. He's like, in a way, he's growing parallel and like opposite to Gon, kind of, because like, I don't know. I guess it's very similar. Like Kite and Komugi are similar figures to like Gon and Meruem in a way. So I don't exactly know where I'm going with that precisely, but it's interesting that I guess I'm trying to connect it back to my Netero point and my Gon point about the whole how they represent their ends in this arc represent like the darker side of this fervent sort of individualism, and then Meruem's journey over the course of his life was about becoming himself and getting that humanity, but it still is in relation to another person, and it's still anchored to this other person. So even though it's like selfish, it's still more pure than like this uncompromising for the greater good thing that he was doing with as far as him being the king of the ants. But it's not so hollow and for a vendetta, and it's sort of the positive side.
Yeah, and what's interesting about him is that even though he was always an ant, he was still always the king. So he was always like an individual leading the collective from day one. Like he was never part of the hive mind, essentially, of the rest of the ants. He was never born. He didn't have a job other than to lead, other than to like be the one guy, essentially. And that's interesting as well, because he did so many horrible things for basically something that he ended up not caring about in the end, because it wasn't actually anything that he wanted. He was trying to like be the ultimate king, the one guy to rule the entire world, and in the end he didn't actually care about that. He just kind of got told, it's kind of like he got told, oh, you're so special, you're so important, everything you say is the right thing, everything you do is the right thing, we'll listen to you no matter what. And then it's like, what's even the point of that? It's like, if you, oh, you're so special, oh, you're so much, it's like, well, what's the difference? And then that's kind of where he comes to as well, with the whole like, well, there's other kings. That's not a special title. I'm not the only one to ever exist. So what's my name? Because that's like actually that's more individualistic. That's more important than being in charge of whatever. That doesn't really actually mean anything. So it is interesting to see, as time progresses and as things go along, how he kind of changes and like realizes what he actually wants when he's like born as like the number one like individual. He can do whatever he wants. He can serve himself. Everything is to serve him. But actually what he wanted was just to like, he could have just lived a quiet life, hanging out with someone that he cared about and like doing no harm to anyone. And like that in a way is like, oh, then you could say, oh, that's selfish to the ants who all like, needed him in this position or whatever. Obviously it didn't matter at that point in the story because they were all dead, but it is just interesting to think about how, you're right, how it's like everything is kind of relatable or like speaks to some part of the human experience. And
that's why it's so bittersweet in the end when he and Komugi die, because they die together. So that's like the sweet part, in that he did come in. He came in the end to that realization and the full self-actualization. But it's just unfortunate that he didn't get to experience it, because and I think that's why it's tragic. Like it's it's tragic because he came so far, and the fact that, and it's kind of that's why it's kind of relatable. It's like a kid who like is gifted, and like you said, has everything going for him. He comes from a good family. He has all the support structure. He's not abused. He's like everything's in line. He's got his life ahead of him, and then he gets cancer when he's like 16, and he gets accepted to Harvard, and then he gets cancer or something, or like it has that thing, and just when they're starting to experience life and themselves and not all this obligation and understanding what they want, then they die, or they get, or you see it in a lot of war movies that happens to like World War I, World War II movies, where they have their whole life ahead of them and then they just die on the battlefield, and it's like it's so needless and pointless, and they're thinking of their mom in their last moments, or they're thinking about their girl back home, or their kid that she's pregnant. There's so much to experience, and then it's just gone. And it really meant something because they weren't just a drone fighting for a cause, fighting for their country on the battlefield. They were a person. They were a father or a brother or a family member. And so it's weird how it kind of taps into that and of that sort of very similar archetype or storyline in such a weird way with the alien shit.
And I think what's like you kind of mentioned as well, it's like, yeah, like he could have died. Or like you could have had his storyline where he like still didn't care about Komugi until the very end, and then like whatever, just if you just ignored the part where she got hurt and then he did care and blah 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 blah. You could have had the same thing where she was just still away somewhere back there and he was fighting, and then he like disregards everything, and then in his final moment he's like, oh no, I wish that I didn't fight and that I just stayed with her and like it would have been okay. But I think it's just kind of interesting that he realized that that's what he kind of wanted before that point, and that's why he was trying to talk, and that's why he was trying to work things out, is because he already realized what was important to him. But even though he was so powerful, he didn't have the ability to do it, and that's why when he kind of gets revived and like gets a second shot at it, once he recovers from his amnesia, he doesn't really waste any time about it, and he's content because he could have died not having gotten those last few games, but instead they got to be together, and that was more than he could have gotten, I guess.
Yeah, and it's not everybody gets a second chance, and usually you don't, and it's like it's again, it's such a classic feeling, that bittersweet feeling of like not knowing what you have until it's gone. That it's interesting how strange the circumstances and the story is with all the fantastical and sci-fi elements and shit, but then it says something so classical, like it says a very classical basic thing that like anyone could understand, without saying it in such a classical way.
And I think what's really interesting is like there's
You're
not
muted.
really a lot of regret.
You're muted.
Oh, I thought that I unmuted. Sorry. I think what's really interesting is like how there's not really a lot of regret in this part of the story. Like Netero doesn't regret going into this fight. Meruem doesn't. In the end, he's not sitting there thinking, "Oh no, I wish that I didn't do all of these things. Oh no, I wish I did stuff differently."
I mean, he literally did though. Like he actually said that in his final moments. He said like, "I didn't realize, this is what I wanted this whole time."
When did he say that?
He said that when they were dying, like when he was playing with her.
I guess I'm misremembering then.
Yeah. No. Yeah. He literally said like, I mean, he wasn't like tearfully saying like, I didn't realize this is what I was giving up, but he was like, he just was kind of dumbfounded. Like I had everything I wanted right here. I didn't need to do any of that. And you're right. It's not quite regret, but it is like, that feeling of what could have been, so yeah, regret in a way.
Yeah. I guess the overall like feeling for me was more like the feeling that I got from him watching it wasn't so much regretful as like more grateful that he is getting to spend this time with her, and that they do get to die together, and like that like final chance, and that like it was something to be thankful for, rather than spending the entire time just feeling sad that it wouldn't go on forever, or that that they didn't get more time. It was like, at least like this is kind of enough, and this is much better than anything else that I could be doing with my last moments. There's,
Yeah. What do you think? There's a couple people who asked. I could find somebody, but what do you think of the? Do you have anything else you want to say about Meruem, about his whole story and everything? Oh, well, before we move on from it, how do you rank him amongst, I guess, characters in general, Meruem and his whole thing? Like, is he one of your more favorite characters, or is he one of your more favorite villains? Like, a lot of people were asking, where does he rank on your villain list? I think so.
I really like him as a villain, and I really like him as a villain in comparison to like Gon as a protagonist as well, because I feel like it just works. He works so well with the story, and like says so much about, I don't know, just everything, because he gets born as like not knowing really anything other than his instincts and like what he's been told, and the fact that he's able to grow so much from there, I think says a lot. And I think also says a lot, is also kind of similar to Killua as well, in a lot of ways, of like how Killua is like this assassin dude who then has a really good shining influence in his life, and then kind of turns it around and like reassesses himself, and like, I feel like it's kind of similar to that. And I think him as a villain is not like, I haven't seen any other villains like him in other anime or anything. I feel like sometimes you can get villains like him in maybe more Western like books or movies or whatever, like this villain that kind of turns it all around for like this one girl who is like too innocent for this world, and just kind of gives him a new perspective. I feel like it's not necessarily a new idea or like something that's like completely unheard of before, but I feel like it is done in a really fresh way, with the whole concept of him being only a month old in the first place, and like not a human, and like just programmed for something completely different. But really, and also what I like about is that he's not perfect, and I did like the him like kind of sliding back and forth, and like not just being like, oh, now I've completely changed my entire outlook, and how it's like it was a very slow.
The crisis that he has is, that he's constantly in like in a state of crisis, and flopping between, like he's always in the middle. He never like fully. It's this constant struggle. It's like it feels like a struggle. That's what is so good about him. And it's not just, oh, he realizes it and he flips, or like, And the fact, I think what's really interesting is that it has to happen over such a short period of time. That makes it a very difficult thing to write, because there's something like Last of Us, which is kind of a similar thing, where this guy lives a certain way, and he has all of these ways that he deals with things, and then you introduce this person into his life, and then now he has to try to protect them, and like still do what he thinks is right, and like finish a job that he knows he has to do, and like by the end of it, he's like completely different, and it's not exactly what you think would happen, And a lot of stories have like more time for the characters to spend with each other, whereas this one it happens so fast. But the fact that it still came off so genuine and good, I think it speaks to Tagashi's writing capability. It was very well done.
Yeah,
I think he's my favorite villain. A lot of people say that Crollo's their favorite. And I think a lot of people who say that might have read the manga, because I think that there's more to do with him in the manga or something, where it's at right now. But I think that his story was far more resonant. It was far more simple than what Crollo is trying to explore. Crollo's shit was it's sort of jumping the shark a lot in terms of like the thematic development of the series. I think Crollo as a villain, his whole thing of like discovering himself. It's a very similar journey, and he's like doing things to try and like fill in the gaps of his personality. And he's very mysterious. But I think that more of that development to his character, and where he would possibly get more interesting, would need to come after something like this, which is way more wholesome and simple, but still very impactful. But I personally Meruem's definitely my favorite antagonist for sure.
I agree. I think that it's it is very simple, but it is very genuine, and it feels very realistic. And I also really like how much character development we got, especially going back again to like comparing it to Gon, and how like he doesn't really like think about the way that he's feeling a lot of times. He just feels the way that he's feeling and acts upon it. And he's like the hero, or like the protagonist of the story, is just like not thinking about why he's feeling the way he's thinking, or examining it all. And then we have the antagonist, who is like very much like trying to understand why he is the way he is, or like deliberately trying not to, and then like failing, and then like you know what I mean? Like it's really interesting when we have going down like a purely primal, instinctual, I'm gonna get revenge path, and then we have Meruem being like, I'm gonna take over the world, except I'm certain things are coming in, and now I have to change my opinions and kind of reassess everything about my life. He's only been alive for 1 month, and like, you know what I mean? Like I just feel like the amount of like, he is also very immature, but he was like desperately trying to understand and figure out his place in the world.
Yeah. Well, because it's really interesting, because the fact that Gon never had to, but he's able to do whatever he wants. But the fact that, and I think that speaks to the whole like man versus nature plot line, possibly, or interpretation, like, or maybe just different just subjective realities. Like the fact that Gon is able to be as monstrous and as forgiving of terrors and murderers, and allying himself with horrible people and doing whatever he wants, and healing mass murderers because he just thought it was a good idea. And the fact that he can do all of those things and just get off scot-free, and treating his friends like shit. The fact that he can get off scot-free doing all those things, but we see it from Meruem's perspective, and he needs to go on this whole journey in order to potentially live a good life, and all the people in the Chimera Ants, like, maybe there's something there of just like these subjective points of interest. Like, Meruem was just doing what he was going to do, just like Gon is trying to live the life that he's going to do. Gon didn't have to reject anything. Gon didn't have to learn or change the way that he is, or go on any kind of self-discovery journey, or fight his instincts. He gives into them, and is kind of rewarded along the way.
And it's interesting that you said about like, or I just thought of this, how Gon never relates people to other people. Like, everyone is like on their own individual basis, other than when he like sees some ants that he doesn't like, and then is like, all ants suck, and then Kite's like, okay, maybe this isn't such a good way of thinking. But it's really interesting because Gon like takes everyone, oh, you're a serial killer? Well, you were nice to me, so that's fine. And has like that very, very much attitude, and he's not like, he doesn't think of when Pito wrongs him, he's not like, oh, maybe to some other people I'm like Pito, I resurrected or like I saved their killer, or like I did this horrible thing. He doesn't think like that. But what's interesting is that Meruem, as he gets closer to Komugi, starts relating her to other people. Like, he's like, oh, what about all of those other people that I killed and didn't think about? What if they were like her? Or like, what if they would have been like her? Did I like how do I know? I'm just killing people randomly. That like I can't do that. I can't, like, killing people that you don't know. Like, maybe that's not such a good thing to do. So it's just interesting how he is like, without any knowledge of humans or anything, he is like trying to, determine what makes people individual, at the same time what makes them the same as other people, and like where the value is in life and in people, and what makes people strong or what makes people weak or what makes people value. Only physically powerful people are strong. Oh, well, actually, maybe that's not quite right. I'm going to need to like reassess. So it's just interesting how much time he spends thinking about the interconnectivity of people. Whereas, and it is interesting that Gon as well, during this, like previously, had just taken things kind of on a, as they come, he thinks about it. And then he like started creating like a mass image of all of the ants and like lumping them together, but like in a really bad way,
Yeah.
I'm just saying it is. I'm just comparing again like the differences between them and how he starts to think less about like the individual characters that he's meeting, whereas Meruem starts to think more about the individual people that he's meeting, and he like starts to, as he feels more like an individual, he like is applying that to other people and being like, oh, if I'm a person, then like this person is also a person, essentially. Yeah. Whereas Gon starts making mass generalizations of like, oh, this one ant said this one thing, all of the ants don't care about their friends, I can kill them if I want.
Yeah, it's very much like the best moment of that is in when they're preparing for the invasion, and Killua meets a Kalgo, and then Gon meets a Cocomelon, meets a Melearon, and Killua is like, we're together, man. It is what it is. I'll save you. That's it. And you don't owe me anything. And but then he's helped by that. And we go over to Gon meeting Melearon, and he's just like similarly sort of disarmingly upfront with how he feels, like how Killua is disarmingly upfront about being kind and open and reaching out a hand and or a tentacle that he cut off in order to latch himself to the ceiling. But Gon's side of it is it's sort of a complete opposite of that, where Gon is upfront and he's like, if you double cross me, then I have no problem killing you. Like, he literally says, he's just like, well, you better be telling the truth, because if you lie to me, then that means I can do whatever I want. It's like there's a fucking clip in Durarara where a guy gets like it's like it's a guy, he's like the big strong guy of the show, and he's set in like modern day Tokyo or whatever, and then he like gets hit in the back of the head with a frying pan or some shit by like, he's getting jumped by all these gang members, and he's just like, hitting me with something like that could kill a guy, right? Which means whatever happens next is all right. is okay, right? That means I can do whatever I want, right? And he punches him out of his clothes and sends him flying 2 city blocks down and crashing into a car. Like, it's awesome. And it's just like, yeah, that's kind of how Gon is in that moment, where he's just like, it's such a good parallel that I think, I'm not sure how many people like picked up that's what the show was doing, because I didn't think of it like that the first time necessarily. It's not that crazy, it's not that deep of a thing, but I just love that juxtaposition. It's so strong and so well done that like Killua is like really trying to pay it forward, then Gon is just becoming way more stagnant. He doesn't have that whimsy to him anymore. He just like fully, and again, it's an issue of perspective because we're seeing him from a different perspective, but like he's just so fully locked in the way that he is that he doesn't see how or he doesn't care how biased he is. It's so the opposite of Meruem, whereas Killua is clearly a lot like Meruem in so many ways. There's parallels with Meruem to both of them. Like with the way that Gon sits and the way that he sits, that's very similar. And the way that they act is very similar, but they're sort of going the opposite direction. And the other person that's going the opposite direction to Gon is Killua. And they both come from this oppressive regime with these like overbearing parental figures like Poof and Killua's mom trying to control them and force them down this path. And you're going to be a lawyer, et cetera, et cetera. You're going to go to school. You're going to do this. You're going to make the family proud. We got a lot of hopes for you. And, they're both, it's crazy. And then they both put their faith in this light, this figure of light that's in them. But difference is the one that Killua's putting his faith into is Gon, and then Komugi's the other one. And they're like, it's just interesting how the show creates these parallels between characters like Gon and Komugi, and Gon and Meruem, and Gon and Killua, Netero and Gon, and Netero and the King, and Netero and Komugi, being like both of these pure like perfectionist humans that have like this core of purity, of honed experience in their one field, and they've developed their entire being around this one thing, and that's so admirable and beautiful. And they're uncompromising about it. But they're so different, and they're so contradictory in some way, in other different ways. Like it's the best thing about this arc, and it's what I love about the ending theme and the ending of the show, the credits. That last shot where it pulls out and you see the whole cast like sort of surrounding each other and like in this battle sort of formation. It's like a some sort of like Shakespearean drama or something, with how every character has their place and they all like say something about the conflict and about each other. There's all these relationships, all these parallels, all these reflective, all these foils, and just that image at the end of the credits where they're all surrounding everything and they all have their place and they're all like opposite to people and next to people, and something about just that whole ensemble is just so cool, and it represents so much of the arc.
And I think what you said is really interesting, how so many of the characters are so like and also so dislike so many other characters. It's like, oh, Poof is very similar to Killua's mom, or like this person's similar to that. And it's what I love about it, and like how you can tell that like the writing is just on another level, is that it doesn't feel like, oh, this is just the exact same character that I've already seen. Great. Oh, you've made like 10 of the same character. Oh, you're clearly just making this character this way so that they're opposite to this other. It's not like, it's like if you look for these connections, they're there, and it's done in such a well done way where could be so easy for, someone with less experience or just maybe not as much talent to, try to draw those same parallels, but have it feel really clunky and very forced, of like, oh, they added in this aspect to this character that didn't really fit, but it was to like make a grander point in the main story, but what I really like is that it does feel really natural, and it feels natural that like these characters are moving in the direction that they're moving in, and how it just the fact that like so many of them are all like just kind of swirling around, and it just seems so normal and so like it was just supposed to be that way,
Yeah, I agree. And it comes from a central idea and I think a philosophy that the author either thought about for this arc or just is so important to them, like all the stuff about individuality and collectivism, and finding your own path and finding out what's important to you based on your own terms. I think that's whether Togashi was thinking about that explicitly while writing, or just that's something that clearly means a lot to him. That's where that comes through, is the consideration and the attachment to something like that. Even if you don't think about it explicitly, it can make a huge difference, because then that's like your soul. That's the soul of the story, and that's this thing that carries it through and makes everything congruent. Everything just kind of fits into place when you approach things from somewhere. Like if you're just approaching things from, I want to write a shonen and I want to be a manga author, then you're going to make something generic because you're trying to do what's been done. You're trying to do what you've already seen. But when you try to operate from your own perspective and from your own spirit and uh, yourself, really, then everything that comes out of that will be coming from a place of your own spirit and yourself, and it comes from a place of importance if you're writing about something that's important to you, and that's kind of it. Um, and obviously being really sophisticated and intelligent as a writer helps that a lot, obviously, because, you know, if a person who wasn't as smart as Sagashi or wasn't as considerate as Sagashi wouldn't have been able to write like him. So it's, you know, he did something really good in this arc specifically. It fits on so many levels, and it was slow at some points. I rejected that before watching this. I talked a lot about how I would always say, like, oh, everybody thinks it's slow. I don't really think so. After rewatching it, it is kind of slow. It's at points it is boring. At points it does drag the battle. It's even in points in that it got really kind of slow. But one part where I also flipped on that was thinking that it was really slow to now having a greater appreciation for it was Ikalgo's story. And I wanted you to talk about what you thought about Ikalgo and all that stuff.
I loved Ikalgo's story. Again, another character that was like, he was so similar to Killua and on such a similar journey that Killua went through earlier on. But it was just so great because we see all of these ants growing and changing and becoming more human, and it was just so great to have one of them like just kind of be so good. Like he's just such a good guy. Like he instead of you know, going down with like Ramit or like any of these other ants that like gained their individualism and then like wanted to use that to pursue their own interests. When he met Killua and was so inspired by him, I just don't even know how to describe it. It was just so wholesome, so good. I loved it so much, and he's so good, and I love like in the battle his parts where he, you know, is going down and he didn't want to kill Bravada, and he really struggled with it, and we see him like it's so hard for him to,
he like completely breaks down crying. It's a big deal, you know.
Mm-hmm. It's so good because we see a lot of times in this show death is just kind of whatever. Like even from the Hunter exam when all those people like literally just jump off a cliff and die, and it's just treated like it's nothing. And we kill all these ants and it's just kind of whatever. So for Ikalgo to have such strong feel, like he can't just kill someone in cold blood while they're unconscious. It's just it doesn't work for him. He has a conscience. He can't do that. And then, you know, with Welfin, that he just displays such strong, like he just has such a strong sense of himself and his character and like what he believes in and like just like what he's willing to do. It's just so inspiring, I guess.
Yeah, and he really does. Ikalgo's story is I mentioned it in the episodes, that it is just such a microcosm of the greater story and what the whole arc is really about, and it's something that I've praised the Chimera Ant arc for like a long time. I think I actually heard this from the YouTuber Alexander. He's the one who like sort of put this thought in my head. He made a video called like I forget which one it was. Maybe it was the morality of Gon Freaks, or it was one of those. It was one of his older Hunter x Hunter videos from like years ago. But he put forward the idea that sort of locked everything into place for me when I before YouTube and everything. Sorry, we had a little recording issue. What I was trying to say was, in Alexander's video, like I was talking about, he put it in a way that really resonated with me and made me sort of think about it kind of set everything in stone the way that I understood the story. Basically, what he said was that the Chimera Ant arc is an arc about kindness. It's an arc about, you know, reaching out and understanding each other. And that's what Ikalgo's little short nugget of a story was about. And it really says a lot about the whole rest of the show, and specifically the rest of the arc. But what I really think about a lot when people talk about this arc is when people talk about it, it's like often like a hype conversation. A lot of people talk about it because it's like the really hype, like fighty battle arc of this show, and a lot of people who watch reactions as well, like sort of look forward to this string of episodes because it's like, it's like the time where shit like comes out and it's like a big deal. It's like all these crazy fights with Netero and Meruem and Gon and Pito and like a dozen others, and Killua goes like Godspeed mode, and there's a whole bunch of really cool things that happen. And the rest of the show is so non-standard as a shonen, so then like if it's kind of like, other than the York New arc, it's even that is non-standard as a shonen, but it has a lot of action. But people sort of look forward to this, or when they get to this point, it feels like, yes, now we're in like the Cell Games arc, or the Namek arc, or everything has been kind of leading to this, and now's the time for like the action to really start happening. And this is what it harkens back to like those arcs in Dragon Ball Z or other big fighty arcs in other shonen. It feels, when you're watching it at times, really classical in that way, of very action heavy, and similarly to like the Frieza Namek arc, it's like when the final battle's going on between Goku and Frieza, there's like time slowing and there's a big transformation and stuff like that. Well, that was crazy thunder. And but it's interesting in regards to this comparison with Dragon Ball Z. There's like, we kind of, as modern anime watchers, we kind of look back on all of those parts of Dragon Ball as like, 5 minutes taking 20 episodes when Namek is blowing up, and all these other like that this whole like these pacing issues and how long things take and stuff like that. We look back on that and we see how like dated that style of anime is and that style of storytelling is. But then we still kind of yearn for it, and I think that is present in people's sort of outlook on this arc. But what's really interesting about this arc, and what's really interesting about Ikalgo's sort of microcosm, like I was trying to say, is that, it's not about defeating the enemy. It's not about having the stronger attack or a big beam struggle or overcoming the odds. It's about having the courage to reach out a hand and be kind and try to understand your enemy, and trying to, take the first step. And that the fact that takes so much more strength and so much more courage. The fact that message is the message of like the big climactic battle arc is very interesting to me. And I think Alexander said something similar to that in the video that I'm referencing. I forget which one, but yeah, I really just love that. And we already recorded this part of it, but I mentioned to Lindsay, first time we recorded this, that it's interesting that Ikalgo, when he is fighting Welfin, what kind of illustrates this parallel is Welfin is Ikalgo struggles to pull the trigger against Bravado when he's unconscious, but then when Ikalgo is being attacked by all those centipedes that are like under his skin, he shoots Welfin like 3 or 4 times or something, and it's just kind of like, and then he says it's a lot easier to pull the trigger when you're about to die, and that's good foreshadowing. It foreshadows Gon like nuking himself when he is fighting Pito, or when his transformation. When you're in that state, it's like a lot easier to just like throw everything to the wayside and throw all your morals away when you're just about to die. Same thing with Netero, as he pulls the trigger when he is about to die, and he's all spiteful and everything and sort of reacting. And but what it's not, it's also what is meant by that is it's harder. It's not just easier to pull the trigger when you're about to die. It's also harder to pull the trigger when somebody's not fighting you, or when you're not about to die. It's a lot harder to pull the trigger. It's the opposite is true as well. So, and that kind of is what the whole arc means. It's like you know, what if or how likely is someone to fight you if you attack them? Well, they're very likely to fight you. How much likely in relation to that is somebody to attack you or to fight you if you don't attack them, and instead if you reach out your hand to them? Well, as we learned with Ikalgo and Killua, it's, very unlikely. It's much less likely than if you attack them. So what the real courage is to be able to reach that out. And again, what's interesting to me about that is that the biggest battle arc that this is the message of that arc. I think that that's really cool.
Yeah, we talked about before how with Killua how he tries to talk to Palm while she's attacking him, and then she comes around in the end. And I also just thought about how it's harder to fight someone when they're not fighting back, and this kind of goes with Netero, and when he is like trying to get Meruem to fight him, he's like attacking him, but he's not fighting back, and like that's not satisfying, that's not good, that doesn't feel good for him. It's harder. It's like what is the point of this? He needs to like make him fight back, or else it's not a fight. It's just it just seems kind of stupid,
Yeah, and we see that with Yuppie sparing Knuckle and Morel. We see that with Meruem when they first show up to take him away, to fight him. The fact that he doesn't attack right away, the fact that he is showing kindness to Komugi, who's wounded and dying, it takes them off guard completely. And so the fact that they're seeing him show this kindness, it changes their entire perspective. And then as the narrator describes, they feel like they lost the initiative because they were expecting a fight, a battle, and resistance from the get-go. Like they were expecting a boss fight when they entered that room, but that's not what they got. Instead, they got something far more unexpected. They got somebody showing kindness, and then there's like everybody, every situation. Yeah, with Palm, with who else? Everybody. With Meruem and Komugi, when he's threatening her, like when he's trying to win, and she's just like, I'm not gonna play if you're heal yourself, because I'm not gonna fight you if like I can't. There's no point to fighting me, right? Like, so it's at every level. It's like the answer to every situation, and what is likely to yield the best outcome is this kindness and this not throwing everything away and trying to move forward. It's great, and it's I think circling back to earlier in the discussion, the way that the reason why Gon and Netero's sacrifices and final attacks and transformations are sort of viewed in a negative way is the fact that all of this stuff, there's like a clear sort of pattern, there's this clear answer to all of these situations and to all of this violence, and it's to reach out a hand instead and be kind. And then we see them, and for some reason them sacrificing themselves out of revenge or out of pride is it's viewed, that's where like the horror movie thing comes from. It's very it's really interesting. I don't think the last recording got you talking about your favorite guard, your favorite royal guard.
I think my favorite would probably have to be Pito. I think that all of them ended up being pretty good in the end. I really liked Yuppie's little arc. I really liked Pito's arc. Poof didn't really have much of an arc. He kind of just stayed shitty the entire time, which is some true dedication, but he was just very annoying and very selfish and very deluded about what was the right thing to do. And I think a lot of things would definitely have been different if he, didn't try so hard to impose his beliefs, on everyone else.
We mentioned last time, I'm not even sure this is we already talked about this part, but yeah, that he like didn't accomplish anything. Like all these people grew or paid it forward in some way. Like Yuppie had an effect on people. He grew personally, whereas Poof didn't. He died. He lived one way and he died the same way, and that's just kind of how it is, you know.
Yeah, like with Yuppie, learning and growing, was able to spare Knuckle and Morel, and Pito was able to save Komugi, and Poof just kind of was delaying and he was just delaying the inevitable. He was like every step of the way he was just trying and pushing back against any change, and it didn't really end up mattering in the end because everything that he tried to stop happened, even like how he tried to bring the king back to life and he still died. So it's it really was all for nothing.
Yeah, and it's crazy. Also, like relating it back, I actually didn't mention this in the last discussion, but relating it back to the Namek arc of Dragon Ball Z as a comparison, it's so a big thing about that arc is, Dragon Ball Z is not quite as sophisticated as something like Hunter x Hunter, obviously, but a big part of Dragon Ball Z's Namek arc, where they go in and they're trying to like defeat this sort of invading force on this on this very beautiful natural environment where these people are living in harmony. Everybody jumps in power levels like by a factor of like hundreds of thousands or millions. Like Goku arrives there and he has perfected a certain like power amplification technique that he learns from one of the gods of the world and or of the universe, and then he leaves a Super Saiyan, and like that is so unbelievably large, and so it's the parallels between like Goku becoming Super Saiyan and dwarfing pretty much everything in power, and Gon doing the same shit, but it being in this new light is interesting. But what's also interesting is that like in Dragon Ball Z, in a very similar arc, everybody grows in power. Everybody grows in a significant way, and they become way stronger. They go through their own transformations. Some of them are, they get some power ups here and there or whatever. But if you take that to Hunter x Hunter, the same thing happens. Everybody else grows, but they don't grow in power, really. At least not anybody who is going to, use it in the future, probably. Gon's fucked up, and Killua, obviously grew a lot in terms of his power, but he learned all that stuff beforehand. He just hadn't shown it off. But everybody grew. They just didn't grow in terms of their power level. They grew personally. They all learned something important, and they all grew as people. So again, those parallels are really interesting, and that's what is so great about Hunter x Hunter, is that it takes it to that level.
Well, it's also interesting that you mentioned that because, yeah, a lot of people grew emotionally, but Gon, who didn't grow emotionally whatsoever, then like got such a crazy power up as like kind of the trade-off of that, like everyone else became stronger or like more like clear in like who they were, like what their goal was, and like had realizations about themselves, and Gon didn't have any of that because he wasn't paying attention. And so that's really interesting of like, yeah, the person who gains such a crazy advantage is disadvantaged in every other aspect of his life because he just doesn't know anything about being a person, a normal functioning person.
Yeah, and it's I think that's actually, I think it's a perfect example. I think a lot of the charm of this arc and the end of this arc is that it makes clearer themes that were present for the entire show. With Gon's personality issues and, Killua, Gon's relationship being a little bit less equal than it might seem on the surface. And a bunch of different things and a bunch of themes as well. I think that Gon's transformation illustrates that theme of power and transformation being a sacrifice and always being a sacrifice. We had Kurapika who put a fucking, curse on himself to only use this one ability against these ants in order for him to become stronger. And in pursuing this revenge on his end, very similar to Gon, after getting this transformation of Emperor Time, he is disgusted with himself and feels terrible, even though he killed like probably the most evil person he's ever met in his life. As far as he's aware, although I think there's theories that maybe there was something more to why the Phantom Troop actually did that, but that's a story for another day. Or why Crollo wanted the eyes, or what there's some sort of something to do with that. I don't know, but anyway, it's the idea that whenever there's power, there's always like this sacrifice of something, and we see that with the king. Obviously, he gets extra power and is not able to use it or experience. He basically gets all this power because of a bunch of random crazy shit of breastfeeding and like, you know, all that crazy stuff with Poof and Yuppie. But so it's weird. But my point is that, you know, that's another like transformation that ends in tragedy. And we see that also with Uvo, or in the York New arc. It's like he's super powerful enhancer, but he is a piece of shit and he is a monster. And you know, it's just a constant theme, and it's good for power scaling, because like with Phaeton's ability is whatever damage he takes, it's like a hellish rebuke. He can multiply it onto the other person and reflect it back to them, essentially, like tenfold or 1,000-fold or something. But he needs to take the damage, so that's the sacrifice. Is whatever he's going to dish out, he needs to take in, so he needs to feel pain in order to do this. That's the same with every transformation, any crazy power. You need to give up something. With Shalnark's ability, he doesn't have any memory, and he is completely physically destroyed after he uses his like literal Super Saiyan transformation, mathematically perfect responses to everything. Yeah, and Killua, obviously, with his power up, even, it's like he needs to literally torture himself. He needs to stick his finger in an electrical socket for like 10 minutes. And he's, you know, trained to deal with that, but it doesn't not hurt, as we learn in the Heaven's Arena arc when he's fighting that guy with the snake freaking electrode things. Every power comes at an incredible cost, and there's no way to get around it. And that's because you shouldn't be trying to fight better. It's not good to hurt people. I have no enemies, basically. You know, like that's kind of the moral of the story. And it's really cool how, like all the other things we talked about, how that ideal is solidified in these final moments of this arc, and I really like that. Is there anything else that we forgot to talk about?
I feel like there was more stuff that we talked about, but now I can't remember what it was.
About Pito's journey? Did we talk about
Okay.
that? I think we mentioned that in the rest of the discussion.
Yeah, I think so.
I think that was it. I think we just said it in less time than it took us to say it the first time.
We didn't talk about the first time Nav and Morel. Do you want to mention them?
Yeah, I feel like there's not much to say about them. Morel's awesome. Nav, it's very interesting how it had a fucking panic attack and like lost all his hair.
But then it's crazy because he did come back.
And he saved Shu.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Which was really...
He wasn't able to fight, but he at least was able to save them.
He did what he could do, and like that was like enough, basically. It's like he did what he was capable of doing in the moment, and it helped. It's better than him doing absolutely nothing. He already did a lot by going in there by himself, and like, you know, he could have gotten killed at any point. So I think that's really interesting. And then I also Morel is just awesome, and I love that he, you know, when I first saw him, I'm like, yeah, right, this guy's probably full of shit. And then he ended up not being. He was like just as confident the whole way through,
and solid,
which was awesome,
rock solid.
I know,
but not perfect.
No, that was the thing in both the Poof fight and the Leol fight. He like made. There's multiple incorrect assumptions about the opponent's power, but that didn't mean that he was stupid or weak or like didn't know what was going on. He was just not perfect. He didn't know
Yeah.
the plot. He didn't know everything about the other person, but he was smart enough to like make rational decisions and rational choices without all the information, and maybe it was like the wrong thing or whatever, but I really liked that.
Yeah, me too. Me too. W. Morel. Really great guy. As was this whole arc. I think we didn't. I don't think we missed anything. I think we talked about everything that we talked about before. We just said it in less words, and you said yours in less words because you knew you were saying a little bit more.
And was there anything else? I guess we talked about Gon enough, probably.
We talked about Gon a lot early on. I will say once again, I'm really impressed that you were able to pick up on the Gon stuff so early, and I think it adds a lot to the reaction. But I'm really pissed at how everybody shat all over me like I spoiled you on it all the time by talking to you about it, because like as if you wouldn't get like, as here's the thing, I want to say this maybe to close this out. It's more of a negative note, I guess, which is unfortunate, but there's a lot with my place in the reaction. I know I've seen the show before, I get it, but like I just wish everybody wouldn't like get on my case for spoiling or influencing all the time. It's fucking Naruto Part 1 all over again. The only time I mention things like foreshadowing and stuff like that is when I know that you saw it, but I talk about it. I just point it out like only when I know you already saw it. Like I can tell when you are like on the same page as me, even if I've seen it. If somebody says something weird, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Oh, it's kind of like, I'll be like, oh, yeah, that's kind of like, if you think about it, it's kind of like this is very interesting. Then you'd be like, oh, yeah. And that's it. I'm not like, I don't think I spoiled you on anything.
I don't think so.
I'm pretty sure I didn't spoil you on a single thing for this whole arc. I kept this really close to the chest because I knew it was going to be an important, big reaction and that it was going to be a big moment. I don't think there were a couple times where I said, I misremembered something and I gave you the wrong information and it was conflicting what was going on in the episode or what then maybe the narrator was saying or like some past detail. But like if I hadn't seen the show, then that wouldn't be a problem because I just be wrong like a normal person is wrong. But it's just so unfortunate how shitty people can be sometimes. And I know it's a very small minority, but it's when one person's writing a comment about something, they represent like a certain portion of the viewership is thinking the same thing, but just didn't say it. So it's just kind of pisses me off the way people are like that. Cause I don't think I deserve it. And I think that I don't think I did anything wrong. I don't think I said anything. I didn't spoil you. And if I didn't know, if I was watching it for the first time, then nothing I was saying would be a problem. So, and the only times that I did give input to you were times where you already saw the thing that I was referencing, and I'm helping you sort of think about it in a deeper way, in a way that doesn't spoil you on it. I'll like, point something out or like direct you in a way, but again, without directing you in a way that you weren't already going, just sort of putting it into words and then letting you talk about it. Like I don't like hijack the whole video and start explaining shit that either you weren't already thinking about or hasn't happened yet. I don't know. That really upset me because I feel like I got a lot more of that this arc than I had for like the whole rest of the series. And I don't understand why. I don't think I did anything wrong.
I don't think so. I mean, I doubt any of the people that are here at the end of this like super long discussion are people that were shitting on you in the comments.
That's true. Maybe it wasn't the best time to bring it up, but yeah, I just that kind of pissed me off. But other than that, I'm glad you really enjoyed the arc towards the end, especially. Mm-hmm. Would you say it's your favorite arc? Or did you like York New more?
Really complicated question because there's certain things that I liked about like all of the arcs separate from each other. I feel like this arc had some of the best parts and also some of the worst parts for me of the entire show. Like I feel like within this arc were some of my favorite moments and also my least favorite moments. So it's just I don't know if I would say it's my favorite. I would say like some of the Meruem and Komugi stuff was like some of my like a highlight, and obviously all the stuff Gon versus Pito, and like there's so much good stuff that happens that is like a highlight for me. But as like an entire arc, if I include like every single aspect of it, I don't think it's my favorite. I'm not sure if Yorknew's my favorite, or maybe even the Hunter exam arc, because I still really like that, and I, especially looking back, I feel like I love how much, like, even though I picked up on some of it at the time, but like just seeing how everything has progressed, I think it like sets up everything so well, and like incorporates some of these ideas that really come to a head in this arc. Like then it was like starting them out. It was like, but it was all still there, you know. So I feel like that's what makes it really good and such a strong start.
Well, yeah. I guess that's it, everybody. Hope you guys enjoyed the discussion. We'll see you guys in the next arc. You can see up to the end of our Hunter x Hunter reactions right now on Patreon if you check that out. And we, hope to see you there. Mm-hmm. Next upload will be the start of the election arc. So we'll get started with that. And we'll see you guys in the next one. I'm Carson.
I'm Lindsay.
Say it again.
Goodbye.
It's muted.
Oh. Goodbye.
Wait, say it again.
Bye.
It's not recording.
Stop.